Thanks very much, Varesh, and good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all here on this chilly night in Hampton. Well, our subject tonight is the Australian government doing enough on climate? And I think we probably all know what the answer to that is. Nonetheless, we'll spend an hour and a half working through that question. We know that the Albanese government has locked in a 2035 emissions target of 62 to 70% below 2005 levels, which is at the lower end of what the Independent Climate Change Authority said was achievable. At the same time, current government policy is on track to cut emissions by only around 51% by 2035, well short of even the bottom of the new target. So there's a lot riding on reforms to the safeguard mechanism, vehicle efficiency standards still being worked out through the next couple of years. And meanwhile, Australia's fossil gas exports have roughly doubled since we signed the Paris Agreement in 2015, and coal exports have grown too, reflecting a gap between domestic ambition and export reality that the Australia Institute has made a central theme of its research, which means it's great news that we've got Rod Campbell here to talk with us tonight. And Rod and I are going to have a bit of a chat for 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll take questions from the floor, so please have your questions ready. But Rod, first I'll get you to just give us your take for 10 minutes or so on that central question of, is the Australian government doing enough on climate?
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. Thanks for coming, everyone. And I can't believe how many people are here and how many people have stayed through that introduction, promising a night of economic modelling and discussion of the safeguard mechanism and lots of percentages. So hopefully it, look, Varesh, it was a fair enough introduction, but hopefully we can spice it up a little bit. I think the answer to the question is pretty simple. No, the government's not doing nearly enough on climate, and arguably they're not really doing anything. But I mean, we should start with, it's not going to be all doom and gloom. I think renewable energy domestically is going quite well. I think there have been some interesting projects going ahead on industrial decarbonisation. I've actually seen some vaguely worthwhile hydrogen projects being funded by some of the Australian government agencies. So it's not a complete disaster, but I think, as you mentioned, some recent forecasts for coal and gas came out, and the government is expecting coal exports to be flat out into the 2030s. There's no plan to phase those out. There's no plan to phase out or reduce gas exports. We've got ministers running around saying that we're going to need gas for decades. Although, interestingly, and something that didn't get a lot of coverage, the energy market operator put out a new report recently suggesting that gas in our electricity system would drop to near zero in the coming years. I think the transition of our domestic energy or electricity system is going okay. Is it fast enough or good enough? Maybe not. But let's on the topic of Australian government and climate, you've got to take the wins where you can get them. And so I think renewable energy in Australia is going okay. I think the rollout of household batteries is going pretty well. So those things are going well, but our exports are not going well. And that's Australia's big contribution to climate change. We're one of the biggest countries in the world in terms of digging it up and sending it overseas. So that's going poorly. And another thing that was interesting in the recent forecasts was forecasts of forecasts of oil imports. How much diesel and petrol are we going to be using into the 2030s? And they were flat or slightly rising as well. So I don't think on those kind of broad measures the Australian government's going particularly well at all. I think there's lots of interesting things going on, though, that we can touch on tonight. And I think the discussion about taxing gas exports and the huge groundswell of public support and institutional support through the union movement, through parts of corporate Australia for a tax on gas exports, I think that's a really big deal. It might not be under the banner of climate policy, but that's effectively what it is, because that would absolutely strike down any new gas project in Australia. And I think that would be a big deal for the climate in general. And it would send a huge message internationally. So I think the debate about gas tax, which will be debated, I haven't read whether it was on the floor at ALP National Conference today, but that's going on, and that's a big deal. I think there's also this week, there's a really interesting planning hearing in New South Wales around the biggest coal proposal in New South Wales. And that's really kind of my jam. My real background is economic modelling of coal mines. And so I know most of the New South Wales coal mines by name. I've been to most of them. I get really quite excited about coal mines. I don't like to see new ones going ahead, but I do like talking about them. And to see the, not just the opposition to, like I think the climate movement and a lot of farming and agricultural interests in New South Wales have been strong opponents to coal there for quite a long time. But to see what the New South Wales EPA is doing and saying, and parts of the New South Wales government are saying about that state's net zero targets and how coal mines might not be a part of that anymore, I think that's actually really quite exciting. So maybe we'll go into more detail on that. I think another thing that's exciting is how is exciting or depressing, a bit of both, is what's happening on carbon offsets. I think the federal government, the Australian government, when they came into office, I think they really thought, we'll get a bit of a review done by some professor and he'll say, oh yeah, we need to clean up a few things, but otherwise carbon offsets are fine and great. I think that hasn't happened. I think for people who remember the review I'm talking about, the Chubb review, I think it was largely derailed and a bit of a disaster for the government. I think the carbon offset system has been largely called out for the fraud that it is. I think the public that pays attention to these things is on board with that. So yeah, I think some of the, I think there's been some really key victories won against the general plan of the federal government to come to power, not do very much, cover it all up with carbon offsets and host a big climate conference at the end of the year and talk about how great they must be because all of the world has come to Australia to talk about climate. And that conference hasn't happened in Australia. It's going to happen in Turkey at the end of the year. But so, yeah, I don't think the government's doing enough. I don't think they're really doing very much at all. But I think their plans to do even less have been somewhat derailed.
It's an interesting prism to be looking at it through, isn't it?
Well, you take the wins where you get them, like I said.
Sort of the least worst situation. But so before we get into some
it could be. Take a step back.
It could be a lot worse. It could be a lot worse.
Look at what look at what was being proposed. Under the 10 years of coalition government, there was proposals for new coal-fired power stations, and we might talk about the state aspect of turning coal into hydrogen and sending it to Japan, all at taxpayers' expense, and the worst possible offset nonsense. Like things could, nuclear. I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed to nuclear in all situations, but what was proposed prior to that election, like there was nuclear madness. Things could be so much worse. I mean, I can remember Angus Taylor standing in front of Australia's pavilion at the climate conference with a big Santos diorama talking about how much awesome fracking they were going to do. So, yeah, things could be way, way worse.
So that's kind of where I was going to go, because a lot of people in this room obviously supported an independent being elected in this electorate in 2022 in what was described as a climate election. The Morrison government had appalling climate policies. There was a lot of pushback around that. There'd been obviously terrible bushfires and other things that had really focused the mind on climate during that political cycle. Myself and a bunch of other independents were elected, but since then, the perception certainly is that climate has drifted off the political radar, that the government feels that it can sort of get away with doing a somewhat okay job on climate without being particularly ambitious. And that's backed up by opinion polls, of course, that show cost of living as the top issue and a range of other things, and this sort of perception that has sort of resettled that concern about climate is sort of an elite issue that people in the cities care about, which, of course, we know that that's not right. But I guess before we get into some of the substance of this discussion, I'm interested in your view around what the public perception is around climate policy and how much of a sort of a political pressure point it is, to the extent that is the government just sort of doing as much as it needs to do to sort of keep people somewhat happy without feeling particularly pressured on climate?
Yeah, I think, I'd agree with your summary there. I think climate's certainly come out of the headlines. I do think there's still huge public support for for decent climate action, and I think you see that when we were talking before coming on a little bit about local government. Local governments pick up the tab for climate disasters in general. It's local governments that have to pick up the fallen trees, fix the road, fix the bridges, fix the leaks in the community centre roof. Local governments, when in places like Lismore, where they've had huge floods and unprecedented flooding, local governments come under huge pressure, and people see their local government struggling. And we as in the Australia Institute, we put out a little graph a while back, and this report wasn't much more than a graph, where we plotted cost of climate disasters according to various insurers, and that's a line that goes up like that, and revenue of local governments, and that's a line that goes like this. And I've rarely put out a report that got so much engaged feedback from so many people, particularly within the local government sector. But local government is the sector that is closest to the community, and I think there are huge numbers of people in many communities across Australia who are brutally aware of the costs that are being imposed on them and what that's going to mean for their families, their local environments, and their local governments. And so, as we discussed earlier, the Australian Local Government Association had their annual conference in Canberra, might be 2-3 weeks ago now, and councils from around Australia, every mayor and council in Australia is represented, and they voted unanimously for a levy on coal and gas production to fund climate resilience and funding for climate disasters. And I think that's a big deal. And if the local governments can do it, why can't the state governments do it? So I think it's fallen from the sort of headlines of the national political media But I think this is still absolutely a burning and important issue for loads of people on many different levels.
Yeah, interestingly, I think at the last election here, although it was very much billed as a cost of living election, climate was still the third issue in all of the polling. So it was still ranking very high in terms of people's concerns. And I was just going to sort of also recount that I think possibly one of the most telling briefings that I had when I was in Parliament with the other independents was with representatives of the insurance industry. So Zali Steggall organised a roundtable with about 25 representatives of insurance companies and peak bodies and brokers and such. And by the end of this 2-hour briefing, all of the MPs, we were literally sitting with our heads in our hands because their modelling, of course, which is financial and risk modelling, which transcends politics, shows that the outlook is really frightening.
Yeah, we often say it doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or not because your insurer does.
Yeah, so I guess where I was going with that is, exactly what you said. Like, it's sort of fallen off the front pages because the political press is only interested in sort of quick sugar hits of what gets attention. But actually, in some ways, does that matter? Does it start getting to the point where it transcends politics because other things are driving the shift unavoidably?
Yeah, it's hard to say, isn't it? And I'm as guilty as anyone of looking at the kind of pseudo porn of federal politics and what has Angus said today, and
telling the dog to shut up.
What outrage has Barnaby performed today? But I think look at it a little bit of a different way. I mean, discussion of emissions and emissions targets aren't on the front pages at the moment. I mean, arguably they should be. And just if since everybody here seems to be up for discussion of percentages and so on, you listed off some of the figures earlier, but all of the figures you talked about are inclusive of land use change, and so that's including how many trees are being chopped down and how much scrub is being allowed to grow back, or how much is being chopped down across large areas of Queensland and New South Wales. But if you actually look at how much fossil fuel Australian industry, Australian households, Australian transport is burning and using, Australian emissions are basically unchanged since 2005. Down very slightly, but basically nothing. We've basically gone flat. And so, that probably should be in the headlines. And I don't know, we try and we try and get it in the headlines, and sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't. But fair enough, we can't talk about the same percentage all the time, so the headlines change. But I think that's where the discussion about a gas export tax is really important. I mean, the focus on it has been about the fiscal elements, and this year it would raise $17 billion if we had it in there. And think what you could do with that. I mean, $17 billion might sound a little bit abstract, but that's free childcare for Australia. That's doubling JobSeeker and lifting thousands and thousands of people or millions of people out of poverty. That's fairly transformational. But while the focus has been on the fiscal aspects of it, I think the important thing to realise is that it's really showing a serious challenge to the power of the gas industry. And the power of the gas industry and the wider mining sector to get its own way. They have tried to shut this down for a year or for 2 years, and they have failed. It is now widely expected that something is going to have to change on gas tax because of the overwhelming public support. And when you see that alongside a few other things, like before the last Queensland election, the Queensland Labor government increased, they actually did some really interesting things, but just to keep things short, they increased coal royalties, and pretty radically. And they brought in a hell of a lot of money from the coal companies. They were very clear about what they were spending it on. They said, we're doing 50-cent public transport for Queensland, or for Brisbane. I'm not sure how they deal with regional transport, but cheaper. We're giving you cheaper transport. We're building X, Y, and Z football grounds. They were very explicit about, we are taking money from the coal industry and we are spending it on things you are going to like. Labor still lost that election, but it was so popular that the LNP, Liberal National Government of Queensland, hasn't touched it. And I remember I did an event with an LNP MP, try saying that 10 times fast, an LNP MP from Queensland prior to the election. I remember asking her straight, are you guys going to change this? Because the coal industry from BHP down were screaming blue murder, and she said, no, we're not going to, it's too popular. And, you know, if she says that to somebody from the Australia Institute, she'll say it to anyone. And so, and that wasn't even the beginning and the end of some of these challenges. I might have passed largely unnoticed, but Victoria increased coal royalties from pathetic to slightly less pathetic a few years ago. The mining industry kicked up a bit of a stink, but nothing happened. And so, and I guess as part of the gas tax discussion, at the end of last year, the gas lobby and the mining lobby, the Minerals Council of Australia and what used to be called APPEA, it's now the Australian Energy Producers, the gas lobby and the mining lobby groups, they got together, arguably most powerful lobby groups in Australia, got together to put on a resources and tax conference. It was in Brisbane. We got all, we thought, oh, this is their big hit back at our proposal for gas tax and higher royalties and all this kind of thing. And we booked billboard trucks and got all excited about, will we take out an ad in the Courier Mail and all these kinds of things. And do you know what happened? Almost nothing. Nobody turned up. Almost nobody turned up. The gas industry and the mining industry had a party, and the only person who turned up was Andrew Lee, who's the assistant treasurer. He's actually a lovely person. I really like Andrew. I've met him because I lived in Canberra, and he's a Canberra MP. I like Andrew a lot. But the point being that it was some assistant finance minister got sent to this. 10 or 15 years ago, back in the mining tax, Rudd era, if the Minerals Council and the gas industry put on a tax conference, you would have had the Prime Minister and the opposition leader there. But at the end of last year, in the middle of all the popularity for a gas tax, they put on a party and nobody showed up. And our billboard truck looked a little bit sad and silly. So I guess my point being, while climate is out of the headlines, the serious political action against the fossil fuel industry has been going on and has been going well. So,
yeah, it's an interesting reflection. One of my big bugbears is that when you go to the airport in Canberra, the entire airport is plastered with pro-gas advertising, and I'm constantly, every time I drive in there, I think, where are the renewable energy?
Oh, it used to always be weapons companies.
It just drives me crazy.
And so you'd always land in Canberra or leave Canberra, and there's all these, Raytheon and BAE Systems ads, and you sort of think, surely our defence bureaucrats would never. Surely they do everything based on need and studies, and they couldn't possibly be influenced by these big ads. But also, surely these big companies wouldn't waste their money on advertising that couldn't possibly influence the bureaucrats. So, who's losing here?
Yeah,
Anyway,
there's got to be a reason for it. But I mean, just listening to you talk there, I'm sort of curious about the bigger picture, because obviously across the world, if you look at dissatisfaction with government, the things that delivered Trump into office, this sort of disenfranchisement that communities have, a sense of elites, the wealth gap, all of that sort of thing. It's now playing out here with One Nation to some degree. And I wonder whether, despite all of the money that the fossil fuel industry pours into advertising and bots and social media and all sorts of things to, control the narrative, whether finally the sort of wealth gap piece, the desire for communities to have more power, more of a piece of the wealth pie, more national wealth is actually starting to cut through in a way that's different.
Yeah, well, I think, let me know if this doesn't actually address your question, but I think one thing that was really new and to me really exciting was the way the budget was covered this year. I watch budgets and their coverage probably closer than most, and I've never seen, in my lifetime anyway, I've never seen a budget that had so much focus on how can we pay for the society we want, rather than what do we need to cut to live within our means. There was so much discussion of, will they tax gas or won't they tax gas? Will they cut negative gearing and capital gains tax or won't they? There was, and it's probably a discussion for another day, but the cuts to the NDIS I think are a big problem and a bad move and poorly justified. But that was part of it. It's not that there was no discussion about what needs to be cut. But I thought overwhelmingly this budget was about how do we pay for what we want, rather than, you're just going to have to suck it up and take your medicine now, everyone. And I actually think that is a fundamental change. And I think it's really a healthy change if we are to avoid, Trumpism and, some of those other lurches to the populist right and so on that we've seen elsewhere. And I have no idea if this is true or not, but one of the rumours that was certainly going around Canberra was that the Treasurer wanted to do a gas tax and the Prime Minister did not. And so as a kind of second prize, he said, okay, well, you can have a go at negative gearing and capital gains tax instead. And I think that's a good policy. I don't like it as a trade-off. And again, I have no idea if that's true or not. But it's a good policy. And I think the government saw an opportunity to do something that would reduce inequality and that would improve access to home ownership. And they did it, and good on them.
Yeah, it wouldn't actually surprise me if that was the kind of trade-off. And I think in part because of conversations that I've had myself with both Albanese and Chalmers around things that they'd like to do, but there's a political risk where they feel hamstrung and won't do it. I mean, I also think it's strongly arguable that having independents in the frame who talk differently about policy de-risks some of these conversations for government as well. I mean, Allegra Spender's obviously been really front-footed on broad tax reform, but, we've all talked about gas tax. I've been talking about the gas tax since 2021, and I know Australia Institute's been on it for a long time, but, over time, when you have a different kind of politician pushing a different kind of narrative out into the universe, I think the government does see, actually that's going down okay. So it sort of then de-risks them to step into the frame around something like negative gearing and capital gains tax.
Absolutely. And I think that period of Parliament where you were in Parliament and the overwhelming expectation for even people within Labor was that they would end up in minority government in this term. Maybe towards the end they started to think majority government was possible or likely, but absolutely the spectre of being in minority government and negotiating with the crossbench 100% opened discussion of a lot of those issues like gas tax, like fossil fuel subsidies, wide open. Maybe it's not as evident here, but we've run events, we as in the Australian Institute, we've run events in Perth and in Fremantle. Fremantle is held by Josh Wilson, who's, he's quite a progressive Labor guy, and he was given a huge fright by the community independent there, who's Kate Hewlett, I think her name is. And fossil fuel subsidies, diesel subsidies for the mining industry, and gas tax were huge issues there. And Josh was really, really sensitive about the idea that Labor was subsidising fossil fuels and putting $1 billion into gas infrastructure in the Northern Territory. And he really was sensitive about this, and because it played really poorly in his electorate, and he knew his seat was on the line. And I think this issue, the issue of diesel subsidies and fuel tax credits, it's one of my pet topics, but it's gotten so much more attention since there was this spectre of, oh my God, is Albanese going to have to negotiate with Zoe to get everything through?
Wouldn't that have been good?
Well, it would have been, it would have been great. But the threat of it and the lives on, and in terms of discussions with the gas industry, and I remember we had meetings with the Japanese government, with the Japanese embassy in Canberra to talk about our research on gas policy, and we said to them, you've done well in terms of influencing both sides of politics, but this was well before the election. But you do realise that if either of them have to negotiate with the crossbench, everything they've promised you will be completely out the window. And the looks on their faces were priceless. Like, this had never occurred to them before. That, oh my God, maybe we haven't butted off enough people. Maybe we haven't paid off the right people. So Labor might be back in, apparently large majority government, but the influence of that period and of community independence absolutely goes on.
And I note that Andrew Hastie, for example, who, I guess will be the leader of the opposition at some point, has indicated some support for a gas tax. And I had a quick chat with him about it when I was in Canberra recently when I ran into him, and he said, I've just got an open mind. But, he's from WA. As he said, it's a topic of discussion there. So at the very least, he's sort of having a bit each way. But I think also he can understand or see that it's a popular policy, so he's not going to sort of put it to bed. As far as the ALP goes, sticking with gas tax for a minute, I don't think they did discuss it today. And they are scheduled to talk about it, and it is rumoured that they'll come up with something at the conference. Do you think they'll actually do it? I mean, gambling's sort of another one where 75% of the community says ban gambling advertising, and they haven't plucked up the courage to do that. So I'm a bit like, well, I'll believe it when I see it on gas.
Yeah, Labor Party officials. So people who don't know, the Labor Party has its annual conference. So it's not it's a 3-yearly conference, I think, to set their. And if there's Labor members who understand this better than me, please jump up. They have their conference every 3 years. It's quite a big deal. I've been to it. They have a little fringe festival off to the side where there's all kinds of stands and interesting talks. It's really fun. But every 3 years they set what is the official party platform. And in the official party platform is socialism. But they don't seem to be implementing very much socialism anytime soon. So they can quite easily have big things in the official Labor Party policy platform that the parliamentary Labor Party, the Labor government doesn't necessarily have to do what's in the official Labor Party policy platform. But is it better, if you like the idea of a gas tax, is it better to have it in the policy platform or not in the policy platform? It's abundantly better to have it in there.
Well, yeah, and it'll create more pressure on Albanese. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, just this week, the Financial Review has had to write about it all week again. And so, I think the hope of the government was that after the budget, we'll talk about other things and people will stop talking about it. But they haven't stopped talking about it. It's gone on into their own conference. It's in all the papers. And especially this idea that we can pay for lots of good stuff if we tax the gas industry, it isn't going away anytime soon. And I think, I kind of like the idea of the next election being fought on what will each party do with the money that they're about to extract out of the gas industry.
Sounds like a good campaign line. There's a few things I want to get to, and we'll get to questions. So I just want to sort of push through a few sort of bits and pieces around what we need to do, what we are currently doing that we shouldn't be doing, or what we need to do more on. So you and I talked a bit before this conversation about offsets, and I don't have a lot of time for offsets personally, having read the Chubb Review and talked to a lot of people about it. But we were talking about the Great Koala National Park in New South Wales. What's going on there, and how sort of illustrative is that case study of the issue with offsets?
Yeah. So I think it's important to go right back to basics, and because it took me a long time to actually understand offsets and carbon credits, and so absolutely no shame in not quite understanding it. So a carbon credit is any kind of credit is just a payment for doing something good. So my children are of an age where they're starting to understand money, and so I'll clean up my room if you give me $5 is a not uncommon sort of negotiation that I find myself in. And so, conceivably, I could pay $5 for a cleanliness credit. Could pay $5 to one of my children if they will generate a cleanliness credit. And that's bad parenting, but it's fine logically, I think. An offset is slightly different. So an offset is where an offset is where I have left the kitchen disgusting and the children's bedrooms are disgusting and my partner is coming home fairly shortly and I pay the $5 to a child to clean up their bedroom so that when my partner comes home and says, "Why is the kitchen so disgusting?" I can say, "Yeah, but I've offset it with cleanliness of children's bedrooms." And this is basically what carbon credits and carbon offsets are. Lots of people, we should be planting trees and we should be conserving koala habitat. All of these things are good. And if the government or if private philanthropists or anybody wants to pay for that via some kind of credit, then great. Plant trees, save koalas, pay people for doing it. We should do that. The problem is when we use it as an offset system of saying to the gas industry, yes, you can have a massive gas export facility off Western Australia that will create more carbon emissions than anybody can think of, or yes, you can have this new coal mine in the Hunter Valley because we can offset it with looking after some koala habitat. It's nonsense. It's just like telling your partner that the rooms are clean, so don't hassle me about the kitchen. And furthermore, and this is something it took me an embarrassingly long time to get my head around, carbon under the ground, maybe at a molecular level, maybe it's the same as a carbon molecule it'd be a carbon atom, not a molecule, but my chemistry is not very good. Carbon atoms in trees are the same as carbon atoms under the ground. But from a climate perspective, having carbon under the ground is much better. Fossil carbon is much better because there's a hint in the name. It's a fossil, and it stays for millions and millions and millions of years under the ground. Carbon in a tree is going to be there for, at the most, a couple of hundred years, and probably a couple of decades. It's going to be in and out of trees and the atmosphere, and in that carbon cycle, into the atmosphere, into the biosphere, into bushes, into the atmosphere. It's not going to be safely under the ground. And so offsets are also trading, when we're offsetting fossil fuel projects with tree planting projects, then we are trading carbon that is safe under the ground for millions of years with carbon that'll be in and out of the atmosphere every couple of decades. And so the whole offsetting system is deeply, deeply problematic.
And with the Great Koala National Park example, isn't it even more problematic in that it's existing native forest that's already there that the feds are allowing the New South Wales government to use as a carbon credit because they're not going to cut it down, even though it's already there?
Let's return to my children and their bedrooms. Or not quite yet. For about a decade, certainly prior to the last New South Wales election, the New South Wales government and the New South Wales Labor Party policy platform, they do it at a state level as well, has been, we will conserve these forests and we will create a Great Koala National Park. There was no ifs, no buts, we're just going to do it because it's the right thing to do. Suddenly, so in my children's rooms example, my children have promised me we're going to clean up our rooms before Mum gets home. 100%. Okay, no ifs, no buts. Suddenly the New South Wales government comes to power and they've said, we won't create that national park and that we promised, but only we'll do it if we can get carbon credits for it. This is like my children saying, we promised to clean up our room. Okay, we promise, little fingers out, shake, and then later saying, only if you pay us $5. No way. And so the problem, in offset terminology is this is something they were going to do anyway. And so to then pay them for it doesn't actually achieve anything. They're being paid for nothing. And so the offset or the carbon credit has no what they call additionality. There's no additional carbon is going to be in trees because it's a national park, because they were going to do this anyway. And absolutely nobody argues this. Even, and there's quite a split within the environment movement in New South Wales and nationally over this. Because, and fair enough, people who've campaigned for this national park for decades, literally decades, they want it. They can smell it. It's so close. What they've wanted for so long and worked so hard for and chained themselves to so many trees for is so close. But it's absolutely poisoned with this, but you've got to give us these carbon offsets. And these carbon offsets are really important because New South Wales has a really strong net zero legislation where New South Wales is committed to net zero by 2050 and various interim targets, but within New South Wales. So they can't buy offsets from other places. And so the only way a new coal mine in New South Wales, or in fact there's no new coal mines in New South Wales, we can talk about that in a minute, but the only way there can be a big expansion of a coal mine in New South Wales now is if there's suddenly a lot of New South Wales offsets. And so in New South Wales, they are literally being asked to put up with completely dodgy offsets that have no additionality that will facilitate major coal expansions, like there's a planning hearing for one this week, in return for their Great Koala National Park. And I do feel for people who've campaigned for it for a long time, but what's now being fought over, and sorry if this is diving into a bit of parliamentary detail, is offsets are set by regulation. Maybe regulation is not the right word, but offset regulations can be disallowed by the Parliament and by the Senate. And so it looks like the federal Senate will vote to disallow, where the government doesn't have the numbers because of crossbench and independent MPs and the opposition, it looks like they will vote against it and it will get voted down. But there are environment groups in New South Wales who are currently frantically lobbying the federal government or federal members of the Greens and federal independent senators on behalf of this dodgy offset thing. It's very confusing and very kind of sad and fraught politics. But I guess the good side of it is look how hard it is to get a new coal mine up in New South Wales now.
The way you described that has just reminded me of so many ministerial briefings that I've been in where the minister's trying to explain.
They talk about their children in their rooms?
No, there's sort of trying to baffle the crossbench with bullshit around, really concepts around ACCUs and the safeguard mechanism, and we're all sitting there trying to understand, and then there's that moment of realising you're in an episode of Utopia. And it really does feel like that. And the number of times I think the pennies dropped for one of us in the briefing, and one of us has said, but hang on, doesn't that mean, and then you can just see the minister go pale that, the crossbench has figured out that this is a rort. I'm going to take some questions in a minute, so if you've got one, please put your hand up and Varesh will have a mic. Before we do that, though, let's go to sort of subsidies and rebates and things. I know this is an area of interest for you and the Australia Institute, and there's been a lot of talk about the diesel fuel rebate, for example. I mean, in terms of things that we're doing that we could stop doing that would make a difference in terms of targets, how significant is that?
Yeah, it's really significant. Does anybody understand what the fuel tax credit scheme is? Go on, hands up if you understand what it is. One. So, and that's totally fair enough. So when you go down to the petrol station and fill up your car, you'll pay, I think it's 45, 46 cents a litre in fuel excise, fuel tax. But if you are Gina Reinhardt and you use the same diesel or petrol in mining equipment, then you don't pay the fuel tax. And by not collecting the fuel tax, and they call that the fuel tax credit scheme, the refunding of fuel tax to. It's mainly mining companies. Mining companies get, I think it's 2/3 of the benefit of it. It costs about $10 billion. It reduces federal government revenue by about $10 billion a year. And I think about $5 billion of it goes to the mining companies. They love to wheel out farmers and fishermen and truckies and say, the fuel tax credit scheme's about helping potato farmers and fishermen, and which they benefit from it, but nowhere near to the degree that the mining companies do. And this was a large part of what Four Corners was about a few weeks ago. Did anybody see it? Where they were talking about how BHP decided that they'd said, and interesting in those kind of offset and promise discussions, BHP had said to their investors, to their shareholders, to the government, yep, we're going to clean up our operations, we're going to start rolling out electric trucks just any minute now. And then what Four Corners and The Guardian found out was actually they shelved that and they decided to just buy a whole new fleet of diesel trucks that would run for 5, 10, 20 years. So they really shelved their decarbonisation plans. And a big part of the reason they did that is diesel for them is cheap because they don't pay the tax. And so while you are being told, oh, the Strait of Hormuz is mysteriously closed for some vague reason, diesel and petrol are getting more expensive. So please, have you seen the ads? Pump up your tyres a bit more and take the tools out of the back of your ute if you're not driving to a job. Maybe you could get the bus. You can get the bus. Gina gets her diesel subsidised. And so does BHP. And that's why they're not investing in electrical machinery. And so, this is a big deal. I know it's one that the crossbench was really interested in. Again, $10 billion a year. If mining companies start paying this, it's an extra $10 billion a year that we can spend on doing up the Hampton Uniting Church Hall, and it's $10 billion a year less to BHP and Gina Rinehart and Clive Palmer. And so, it is a big deal. The crossbench is right to focus on it. And it's great that Four Corners have been looking at it. And again, it's something that parts of Labor are interested in. The mining company, Fortescue, that's the Andrew Twiggy Forrest mining company, is actually in favour of getting rid of it. Maybe they're interested in saving the climate, but maybe they are. They say they are. Some of them certainly are. But what they really see is an opportunity to be the green steel producer. They can be the lowest emitting steel producer or iron ore, and they'd like to do more processing as well. They can see a market opportunity in being the greenest, but because they're being undercut on price by their neighbours, that they want to get rid of it too. But there is quite a bit of momentum in terms of getting rid of this. I think that's another reason for some optimism.
He has a question for Rod.
Please. Hello, I'm Carol. I'm pleased to be able to ask you a question. I'm just thinking, the carbon trading scheme, it caused a bit of a problem for a certain Prime Minister in 2007. Are all things that you're proposing? I know that you are feeling you've got to, get some, shall we say, ready for all sorts of projects that are needed in Australia. I understand that. And there are really good projects that you're thinking of. But with you trying to push back at the level you want to push back, are you risking a carbon trading scheme situation where you push back too much that doesn't happen at all? And can I just add that back in 2007, everything started with renewables, and it was all about renewables, and they've quietly worked away in the background. But according to Tom Woodruff, who my apologies, Zoe, I missed, Joe and I, as you know, had a slight traffic problem that night. But we were in an EV, so I'll just put that to one side. But can I say that the Chinese are actually doing renewable projects, faster in a week than we do in a year. So renewables or renewable projects have been going since 2007, quietly working away in the background. And Labor are really, I will give them some credit for that they are continuing that at scale, but not as fast as some of the other countries in the world. So can I just go right back to the beginning again and say, are you pushing back too hard? You're going to find yourselves in a bit of a situation like Malcolm Turnbull back in 2007.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not the government, and I'm not Malcolm Turnbull, and I'm not likely to be in Parliament anytime soon. I guess I'd be interested in Zoe's thoughts on this. I think the nub of your question is, do you need to have bipartisan support for a policy? Do you have to get both the major political parties on board? to make serious policy change. And I would argue, do you accept that as a characterisation of your question?
There's so many people now in the room. You've got the independents in the room now, yeah? And you've got voices worth hearing. But the problem is, are you pushing with something that's just, too difficult for the current? I would say that your Labor government, your Liberal government are conservatives at best. Yeah? So you really are challenging them. Are you at risk when you do that? Do you need to scale it back to maybe renewable energy projects, or could you get electricity at a cheaper price because you've got battery storage in households that's working? It's starting to bring prices down. Can you get more EVs in the road? I know that may not appeal to the suburbs people. Yeah.
Do you mean is pushing against the fossil fuel industry less constructive than promoting the renewable energy industry? Look, I would say we can walk and chew gum at the same time in Australia. I think we have been doing reasonably well on renewable energy, but Australia, our big impact on the climate is the huge volume of coal and gas that we export, and we give it away for free. In the case of gas, the Commonwealth literally gives it away. They charge no royalty, and they, until recently, charged no PRRT on the gas that was extracted. So I don't think pushing back on some of that is a problem. I think that, and I think the key point is there's huge support for that. There's huge public support for taxing gas, for taxing resources better. There's also huge public support for renewable energy. So I guess then you potentially, do you urge a government to do something like tax gas in order to subsidise renewable energy? But I don't know. I think then you risk pushing too far and alienating too many people, because there's loads of people who are on board for taxing the gas industry, but lots of people who think, actually, I think that money should go into youth mental health, or I think that money should go into domestic violence prevention. And so I guess at the Australia Institute, what we're saying is it's a no-brainer, and those are the words of Nobel Prize-winning economist Joe Stiglitz, it's a no-brainer to tax the gas industry. What you then do with that money, I think that should be a democratic discussion, and a discussion that I think has engaged a lot of people, and not just people who are interested in climate. So I do take your point that it's important to promote the good things as well as bash the bad things, but I think we can do a bit of both. What do you think, Zoe?
I think it's a really good question, actually, Carolyn, and it's sort of causing me to think around the social licence issues that obviously we're facing as a nation around renewable energy and climate policy, and the way that we have this conversation in an inclusive way to make sure that the benefits are flowing to communities. And at the end of the day, I think that the what's in it for me question is really relevant for a lot of people. And you've seen, like on EV uptake, for example, since the cost of fuel's gone up, EV uptake's gone up because people can see a direct benefit. But, on a larger scale around renewable energy rollout in regions, for example, I think communities want to see direct benefit to them. From a political point of view, I think it is an interesting question in that I think particularly the Prime Minister that we have now does not like being cornered. And so there is sort of a limit to how far you can push him, particularly into a corner. You have to give him an escape route because he gets very punchy, in my view, when he's wedged, which is what you've seen happen on gambling, and now we're stuck. So we certainly don't want to see that happen on other issues. Who else has got a question? Yes, Jo.
This is a question from somebody else, actually, who's not here. What can be done to counter the forces working against taking climate action? Forces working against taking climate action being the likes of the Coalition, One Nation, Murdoch Press, regional rednecks, etc.
Loads of things. Yeah. Turn up to events like this. Write letters to the editor. All MPs read the letters to the editor page. Write letters to your MP. Donate money to the Australia Institute. Get it. I think the person who told me this was Tony Windsor. And Tony Windsor was an independent MP in the lower house from New South Wales, and a lovely guy. And Tony, we launched an event with Tony or something, and I can't remember how we came to it, but I remember he turned to me and he said, "The country is run by the people who turn up." And it is turning up and getting other people to turn up that will win the day. And that can be attending a council meeting and putting pressure on your council to say ask your councillors, are you aware that all local governments voted unanimously to put a levy on coal and gas production to fund climate costs, and how are climate costs projected to increase in Bayside? Turning up is really important, and whether that's having a sign on your fence at the upcoming state election, turning up to events for that, turning up and getting involved and helping other people do so, and helping. I guess at the Australia Institute we like to try and help people understand what they're talking about, because so many things. So many structures are set up to try and exclude people. And I guess a lot of us at the Australia Institute, we're economists, and economists are particularly bad at this, at using jargon and equations and funny graphs and things to make people think, I don't quite understand these equations, so I guess I can't say that I think we should tax gas and fund domestic violence prevention. And so what we see our role as is really trying to explain things in a way that exposes how power works, and exposes that the power of the forces that are opposed to climate action is generally related to the perception that they're too economically important, too politically important, and that we have to just suck it up. The backbone of the economy is the coal industry. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that said. It's not true. Less than 1% of the workforce works in coal. Even in New South Wales, it's between 1 and 2% of the workforce. 98 point something percent of New South Welsh workers, so 99.5% of New South Welsh people don't work in the coal industry, and yet it gets said with a straight face by coal lobbyists, we're the backbone of the economy and you'd all fall apart without us. It's 2% of New South Wales government revenue comes from the coal industry. In Victoria, it's 0. So, I think in addition to turning up, it's, I guess, helping other people understand that by not taking climate action and by letting fossil fuel companies get away with the nonsense that they do, that you're being ripped off. We can't have as nice roads or parks or community music programs, because we're being ripped off by the coal industry. And helping people understand that, I think, is really important.
I think everyone in this room knows the value of turning up. It would be much easier not to turn up some of the time, but we all continue to turn up. But I did want to just probe a little further on the One Nation issue. And you and I talked about this the other day on the phone. I'm curious what influence you think that has, particularly on the coalition's positioning on climate, sort of enabling, obviously, a more right-wing position, pulling out of Paris, all those sorts of things, and then what impact that drift potentially has on Labor and the sort of broader matrix.
Yeah, I think it's madness. I don't understand the coalition strategy over the last 7 years at all. So if you go back to the 2019 election, it was a pretty grim night in many respects, or at least for me. But Tony Abbott lost his seat, and he lost it to Zali Steggall. And not to take anything away from you and some of the other crossbenchers who won seats at the 2022 election, but in that 2019 election, if you go back and look at the swings, the swing against Josh Frydenberg and towards, what's the guy's name? He used to run the CEFC. Anyway, towards the independent, whose name I've just forgotten.
Yeah, I can't remember his name. Julian Burnside ran in that election as well. There was a three-cornered contest.
But a lot of that, so Tony Abbott lost his seat. Josh Frydenberg's margin took a massive hit. So did all of the other ones that independents managed to flip at the 2022 election. And what was the lesson that the coalition took out of those swings? Go further to the right. Go to 2022. They actually lost all of those seats. And what was the lesson they took out of it? Oh, we need Peter Dutton. Peter Dutton lost the election, from what in some respects looked like a commanding, potentially winning position at some points. I don't think he was ever in the hunt myself, but that's another story. But what lesson have they taken out of that? Move further to the right. And I think it's madness. I don't quite understand why they keep doing it. They've just put Tony Abbott in as the national president of the Liberal Party. I mean, this guy was the start of the problem. He was the first inner city seat, the first blue ribbon seat that got lost. What on earth are you doing promoting him to this position? And I think you see it at a state level as well. And I think actually state politics, if you look at the Liberal Party's performance across state governments this century, I think the apparent, you're asking about the One Nation phenomenon, but the One Nation phenomenon is basically the collapse of the coalition. And the collapse looks like it's happened all of a sudden. There's Donald Trump and Nigel Farage, and now we've got Pauline Hanson. But actually, if you look at the Liberal Party over this century, I lived in Canberra for quite a long time. They haven't been in government in the ACT this century. They've only had 4 years in government in Victoria this century. Similar in South Australia. Actually similar in Queensland, even though they're back in government there now. They were in government for a fair while in Western Australia until the COVID and the McGowan era absolutely wiped them off the map. And that's important, not just for who is in or out of government, but as a party that aspires to be a major party and a party of government, suddenly you've lost a hell of a lot of people. You've lost all of those staffer jobs. You've lost all of those state MPs. You've lost all of those electorate office jobs. All of those things that you can sort of promise to people, or there's a vague promise of I'm new at university, I'm sort of conservative, I'm interested in economics, maybe I'll join the Liberal Party and maybe I'll get a job in the state member's office. all of that's gone. And so the ecosystem, the people moving into the party who are, perhaps moving into it because they're competent professional people and they're trying, and they're ambitious for themselves and they want to move up. They're not particularly ideological. Those people that intellectually really and managerially can really run and be the brains of the party, they're all gone. And so the One Nation phenomenon is more the collapse of the Liberal Party that reflects these decades of shifting to the right, becoming less electable, losing state seats, losing councils. I mean, in New South Wales, they had an administrative error that meant they didn't get any local government candidates in. There's another, tens, if not hundreds of councillors gone. They might, get the say over various staff or various board appointments. Bam, they're all gone. All those lollies that a political party relies on being able to hand out to bring people in and keep itself healthy and intelligent, it's all gone. So sorry if I've ended up on a rant there and avoided your question, but that's why they look and act like zombies, because it's a zombie organisation at the moment.
Right. Okay, I think we've got time for one or two more questions. Who's got one?
I promise I'll do short answers now. Let's get through a few.
So much a question. This is a statement. I'm come over from WA. We have challenged
For our event. That's fantastic.
we've come over to challenge Minister Watt's approval of the Northwest Shelf.
Yeah.
And he did it incorrectly. So here we are sitting in a room with 16 barristers to debate whether or not Woodside can have the right to pollute and cause climate change. And the federal government delegation has acceded and said, I'll let Woodside speak for me. I don't even need to speak on my behalf. That's how pathetic the government is about climate change.
Wow.
Wow. Oh, well, good on you. Good on you. That's fantastic.
Amazing.
Well, I mean, it's terrible, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Hi, Greg Lanier. I'm curious what Australia's Institute, or the Australian Institute's opinion is on media regulation and keeping editorial sort of separate from ownership. You raised that at the beginning.
Yeah. Look, I don't have a strong view on media regulation, but I think some research we put out at I think it was end of last year, really looked at the influence on the ability of the major mastheads to influence elections. And I guess what we found is it's completely disappeared. And so I guess what I take out of that is, or what I think the government hasn't caught up with, is that there is absolutely no need to pander to the right-wing media anymore, or to the Murdoch press, to the AFR, and quite why the Treasurer continues to write op-eds in the AFR, in the Australian. I can't quite understand it, because I think they're a house of cards now. I mean, they still certainly have influence within powerful circles, but their ability to influence actual election results has really evaporated. And so I think more than any change to media regulation, I think the realisation that those publications that used to strike fear into the hearts of MPs, they can't do that anymore. I hope more of them realise that. I think in terms of regulation, one thing we'd love to see come in is truth in political advertising laws, which isn't directly what you're talking about, but it's perfectly legal to lie in a political ad at the moment, and it shouldn't be. It's not legal in South Australia, it's not legal in the ACT, but in the rest of the country, you can lie in a political ad, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. So, I don't know. What do you
More
think?
questions?
My question is maybe not as weighty as some of the topics we've discussed.
Thank goodness.
Nevertheless, I think it's important. Are you going to push back in rural areas from farmers' land that's subject to being utilised for transmission lines? They argue that they lose too much land. There's a 100-metre no-go zone. 5 trucks can't drive under the transmission lines. Maintenance workers have got to be access roads, so I lose even more country. And then they want 24/7 access. How do I control my gaining? How do I keep my animals out or in? And so I just wondered, is there any truth to these arguments? Is that something the Australian Institute gets into?
Yeah, I haven't looked at that very much. I'm sure there's certainly some truth to it. Like, you know, if I was a farmer, would I want an enormous cable going across my land? You know, probably not. I guess one thing, I'm not sure if it's the same for transmission infrastructure, but with wind turbines, farmers receive really good money for hosting wind turbines. So, you know, if you don't want it, like, don't take the money, I guess it would be my my proposition to people. But I think, look, I think for individual landholders saying I don't want this on my land, I think there's a really strong case for that. I think I'm that's fair enough. That's your land and it's your opinion. So okay. What I have less time for is the people who have taken that up as their cause. All of these people who are totally okay with fracking, with coal expansions, with gas pipelines, never said a peep about any of these things. Suddenly, oh my goodness, we have to go in and fight for the farmers and their fights against transmission infrastructure. That I've got no time for.
We have time for one more question.
And just a little bit of an answer to your question. There is quite a lot of information out there that answers all of those questions, and publications like Renew Economy have excellent articles all the time. But if you go to Farmers for Climate Change, they address all of those issues, and basically they're just like farming, for instance, and all of the misinformation that he pushes, and then he just gets people riled up who have no idea what they're talking about. People.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to say thank you to Rog. Thanks everyone for coming, and please thank our guest.
Thanks, Ariel. Thanks, Steve. Now.